With her heart pounding in her chest, she raised her face. His eyes, which had once been a sea of indifference, now seemed to seek a safe harbor in hers. His hand, firm, held hers with an urgency that belied the forced calm of his voice. "You cannot go, Amelia. Not now." The plea sounded almost like a supplication, a crack in the armor of the man the world called the Baron. "Before we delve into this story, leave your comment with a rating from 1 to 10 and tell us which city you're joining us from. May this moment bring reflection and emotion to your heart." The carriage swayed like a boat adrift, and each jolt on the dirt roads felt like a shove from fate, pulling Amelia from one nightmare only to cast her into another. The scent of damp earth and wet foliage drifted through the window's cracks, a perfume that, for anyone else, might bring peace, but for her, it was the aroma of humiliation. She wore a mourning that was not for someone's death, but for the death of herself. The dress, of simple, dark fabric, was the shroud of her dreams, of her will, of her name. Volmont Estate, the final destination of that journey, echoed in her mind not as a place, but as a sentence. When the wheels finally ceased to creak, a heavy silence settled in the air. The door opened, and the grey light of a morning that promised rain revealed the imposing manor house. It was an old construction, with white walls stained by time and blue windows that looked like sad closed eyes. A middle-aged man, his face etched with solemn respect, helped her descend. He was the butler, a gentleman named Sebastian, whose shoulders seemed to bear the weight of the house's secrets. He did not smile, merely nodded, and said in a low voice, "Welcome, madam. The Baron awaits you." Amelia felt a shiver. The word madam sounded like a cruel jest. She was mistress of nothing, least of all herself. She entered the house, feeling the cold of the dark wooden floor beneath the worn soles of her shoes. The air inside was still, smelling of wax, old books, and something more, an ancient sorrow that seemed ingrained in the furniture, in the walls, in the portraits of ancestors who observed her with stern gazes. The silence was so profound that she could hear her own breathing, short and nervous. And then she saw him, standing at the top of the grand staircase, silhouetted against the light of a stained-glass window, was the Baron of Valmont. Augustus, as she knew his name to be. He was taller than she had imagined, with broad shoulders that his dark, well-tailored suit could not disguise. His hair was dark, with a few silver strands at his temples, and his face, his face was a landscape of solitude. Deep lines marked his forehead and the corners of his eyes, which were of such a clear, cold blue that they seemed like fragments of a winter sky. He stared down at her from above, without descending a single step, and his gaze held no anger, no pity, no desire. It held an emptiness, a distance that made her feel even smaller, even more insignificant. "So, this is the girl," he said, and his voice was grave, a suppressed thunder that echoed through the hall. It was not a question, but a statement, a tired statement. Amelia swallowed hard, her wounded pride battling fear. She forced herself to lift her chin and meet his gaze. "My name is Amelia," she replied, her voice a trembling thread that she hated for its weakness. He descended the stairs slowly, each step echoing like a hammer blow. He stopped a safe distance from her, as if she were a wild creature that might startle or attack him. His eyes swept over her simple dress, her hands nervously clasped in front of her body, her pale face and her frightened eyes. "I know your name," he said at last. "I also know the circumstances that brought you here. Your father was quite clear." The word clear was spoken with a hint of scorn. Sebastian will show you to your room. I imagine you are tired from your journey." He turned, giving her his back, as if the conversation was over, as if she were just another piece of furniture that had just been delivered. That indifference hurt more than any shout, any accusation. It was as if she did not exist. "Wait," she said, her voice a little firmer now, spurred by a last shred of dignity. Augustus stopped, but did not turn completely. He merely looked at her over his shoulder. "I want you to know," said Baron, "that I did not come here of my own free will. I was sent as—" she hesitated, searching for the right word, "as part of an agreement to settle my father's debts. But I am not a commodity. I have my hands, I know how to work. I will not be a burden." For the first time, a spark of something that wasn't emptiness shone in his eyes. Perhaps surprise, perhaps irritation. He turned to face her directly. "A burden?" he repeated, a faint, joyless smile twisting the corner of his lips. "My dear girl, this house already carries burdens far heavier than your presence. Do as you wish. The house is large. As long as you do not disturb me, you may consider yourself invisible." With that, he ascended the stairs and disappeared into a dark corridor, leaving Amelia alone in the middle of the hall, with the echo of his cruel words and the certainty that her new life would be a prison of silence and solitude. Sebastian approached, his face impassive, but with a trace of compassion in his eyes. "This way, madam," he said softly. "I will take you to your quarters." The room was large, larger than any room in her parents' house. It had a four-poster bed, dark furniture, and an enormous window that overlooked the golden fields of the estate. But it was a cold, impersonal room. It seemed like a guest room that had never been used, waiting for someone who would never arrive. On the bed, there was only a set of simple sheets. There were no flowers, no book, no sign of welcome. It was just a place to sleep, a place to be invisible. Amelia sat on the edge of the bed, her body exhausted from the journey, her soul crushed by the weight of that day. Hot tears began to stream down her face, silent and bitter. She didn't weep for the family that had cast her aside, nor for the fiancé who had scorned her. She wept for herself, for the young woman who once dreamed of music, of laughter, of a love that was a choice and not a punishment. There, in that cold room, on that silent estate, under the gaze of a man who saw her as an inconvenient object, Amelia felt that this young woman had finally ceased to exist. She lay on the bed, still dressed and curled up, hugging her knees as the afternoon fell outside, slow and grey, exactly like the life that awaited her. The first days at Valmont Estate were a succession of silent hours, marked only by the chirping of birds at dawn and the distant sound of the bell calling the field workers. Amelia quickly learned the house's routine, which operated with the precision of an old clock. The Baron descended for breakfast promptly at 7, ate alone at the long dining table, reading the newspaper, and then left for his study or to ride across his lands. Amelia, in turn, cooked her coffee in the kitchen, along with the cook, Mrs. Lucy, a woman with an easy smile and nimble hands, and the young housemaid Teresa, who looked at her with a mixture of curiosity and pity. Amelia insisted on helping. For her, work was the only way to maintain her sanity, to feel that she still had some purpose. She spent her mornings in the kitchen, learning from Lucy to knead bread, to prepare vegetables harvested from the garden. The smell of garlic and onion sorting, the warmth of the wood-fired oven, were simple, real things that anchored her in the present and prevented her from drowning in memories. In the afternoons, she sat near a window in the sewing room, a small dusty chamber, and mended the servants' clothes, the house's linens, anything that needed repair. It was meticulous work, requiring concentration, and her hands, which once learned to embroider silk and play the harpsichord, now dedicated themselves to firm, practical stitches. Baron Augustus kept his promise. He ignored her. Their paths rarely crossed, and when they did, he passed her as if she were part of the furniture, a faceless shadow. Amelia, in turn, also kept her distance, her pride preventing her from seeking any kind of closeness. The silence between them was a wall, built of his indifference and her resentment. One afternoon, while organizing the linen closet, Amelia found a stack of fine fabrics, linen and cambric, stored at the bottom of a drawer with lavender sachets. They were delicate pieces, nightgowns, handkerchiefs embroidered with initials that were not hers. She realized, with a pang in her chest, that they must have belonged to the late Baroness. A soft, almost ghostly scent still emanated from the pieces. She quickly closed the drawer, feeling like an intruder, as if she had violated a tomb. The first crack in that wall of silence happened on a cold night, almost 2 weeks after her arrival. Amelia was in the sewing room, finishing sewing a button onto Sebastian's shirt by the light of a candelabra. The rest of the house was already silent. Suddenly, she heard footsteps in the corridor. The door opened, and the Baron appeared. He seemed surprised to find her there. His hair was slightly disheveled, and his eyes tired. He carried a piece of clothing in his hands, folded with almost reverent care. "Still awake?" he asked, his voice softer than usual. Amelia stood up, her heart racing. "I was just finishing a repair, sir." He entered the room, his gaze sweeping over the piles of fabrics, the sewing basket. It seemed strange territory for him. He extended the piece he held. It was a man's shirt, of very fine white linen, but with a small tear near the collar. "This," he began. His voice, hesitant, was hers. "My late wife's. I have kept it for years. I noticed this small flaw. I was wondering if it would be possible to mend it, but in a way that wouldn't show. Almost invisible." Amelia took the shirt. The fabric was soft and cold to the touch. She felt the weight of that request. It was not just a tear in a piece of cloth. It was a memory, a wound he wanted her to heal without leaving a scar. She looked at his face and saw, for the first time, something beyond coldness. She saw a deep pain, a vulnerability he tried so hard to hide. "I can try," she said, her voice low. "I will do my best." He merely nodded, his lips pressed into a thin line. "Thank you," he murmured, and left the room as suddenly as he entered, leaving Amelia with the ghostly shirt in her hands. She did not sleep that night. She sat by the window, under the moonlight, and worked on the shirt with an almost sacred dedication. She used a very fine thread, the exact color of the linen, and her agile, experiencing fingers wove the stitches with surgical precision. She wasn't just mending fabric. She felt she was sewing something invisible between her and that man. It was a fragile bond, made of sadness and a silent plea for help. The next morning, she left the shirt, perfectly mended and pressed, on the armchair in his study. Before he awoke, she didn't want to hand it to him, didn't want to see his reaction. It was a silent gesture, a response to his request. Later that day, as she watered the ferns on the veranda, he approached. Amelia felt his presence even before seeing him. The air seemed to grow denser. "The shirt," he said, stopping a few steps from her. "It was perfect. The mend is invisible." "Thank you. It was nothing," she replied, without turning, concentrating on the plant in front of her. There was a pause. Amelia could feel his eyes on her back. "You have skillful hands," he continued, "for sewing. I learnt early on," she said, finally turning to face him. It was one of the few things a young lady of my former position could do without being considered improper. There was a touch of bitterness in her voice. He observed her for a long moment, his face indecipherable. "Impropriety, Miss Amelia, often lies in the eyes of the beholder, not in the hands of the doer," and with that enigmatic phrase, he walked away, heading towards the stables. Amelia stood on the veranda, the watering can in her hand, her heart beating a little faster. He had called her Miss Amelia, not girl, not a young woman. He had seen her, for the first time, in that gesture of asking for help to mend a memory. He had truly seen her. The wall between them had not fallen, but a small, heavy, and significant stone had been removed, and through the crack a timid light began to pass. Life on the estate continued its slow and predictable routine, but something had changed in the air. Baron Augustus no longer ignored her completely. Sometimes during dinner, which Amelia now took in the dining room, at a distant end of the table, at her silent request and his unspoken permission, he would address a word or two to her. He would ask about the progress of the garden work or comment on the weather. These were trivial, brief conversations, but they broke the oppressive silence that had previously reigned. Amelia responded with the same formality, but felt the tension between them lessening each day, like a mist dissipating with the first rays of sun. He began to observe her. Discreetly, but he observed. He noticed the way she arranged her hair that stubbornly escaped her bun. Concentration on her face, as she read one of the library books he had given her permission to frequent. The care with which she treated the staff, always with a kind word. He saw in her a quiet strength, a dignity that came not from her name or her clothes, but from within her. A dignity she refused to lose, even after losing everything else. The second major turning point, the event that would transform respect into admiration, came with the force of nature. Summer was drawing to a close, and with it the violent storms that swept the valley. One afternoon, the sky, which had been a clear blue, suddenly darkened. Heavy, dark clouds gathered on the horizon, and a cold wind began to blow, rustling the trees and kicking up dust. "It's going to pour," Mrs. Lucy said in the kitchen, making the sign of the cross. "I hope the field workers have already brought in the animals." Amelia looked out the window and felt a pang in her heart. The rain began, first with thick, spaced drops, and then turned into a deluge. Thunder rumbled, making the house windows rattle. It was then that Teresa ran into the kitchen, her face pale with terror. "The lambs, the new lambs," she cried, breathless. Joachim had to leave in a hurry to help his wife, who had taken ill, and forgot to close the gate to the lower pen. "With this rain, the stream will overflow and flood everything down there." A panic set in. The men were all far away, working on the coffee harvest, trying to save what they could before the rain ruined everything. The Baron was locked in his study. Sebastian was too old to face such a storm. Without a second thought, Amelia acted. She took off her apron, grabbed a thick wool coat that hung near the door, and ran outside, ignoring Mrs. Lucy's shouts for her to come back. The rain was a dense, icy veil that blinded her. The wind pushed her forcefully, and the mud made the path slippery and dangerous. She ran towards the lower pen, a small enclosure near the stream, used for the younger animals. When she arrived, the scene was desolate. The stream had already overflowed, and the muddy water rose quickly, turning the pen into a trap. The little lambs, frightened, huddled in the highest part, bleating in fear as the water rose dangerously around them. Amelia did not hesitate. She opened the gate, which the current stubbornly tried to close, and stepped into the icy water, which already reached her knees. She began to guide the animals out, pushing them, speaking to them in a calm voice she didn't even know she possessed. One by one, she led them to higher, safer ground. But one of them, the smallest, was trapped, its paw entangled in a submerged wire fence. Meanwhile, in the manor house, Augustus heard the commotion. He came out of his study and found Lucy and Teresa distressed at the kitchen door. "What is happening? Where is Miss Amelia?" "She went to save the lambs, master." "Alone, in the midst of this deluge," Teresa replied, crying. An expression of alarm crossed the Baron's face. He grabbed his horse, already saddled, and galloped towards the stream, his heart pounding in his chest, a mixture of fury at her recklessness and a fear he hadn't felt in a very, very long time. He found her in the torrential rain, water up to her waist, struggling to free the last lamb. Her dress was drenched and heavy with mud, her hair loose and plastered to her face. She was trembling with cold, but she did not give up. He leaped from his horse and entered the water without thinking. "Are you mad? What do you think you're doing?" His voice was a thunder that competed with the storms. "He's trapped. I couldn't leave him here to die," she cried back, her voice full of a determination that surprised him. Augustus approached and, with his strength, managed to break the wire and free the animal. Amelia took it in her arms, exhausted. She turned to leave the water, but her legs, weakened by the cold and effort, gave way. She would have fallen if he hadn't caught her. For an instant, they stood there, in the middle of the current, the rain falling on them. He held her firmly by the waist, and she leaned on him, clutching the small lamb. Their faces were inches apart. He looked into her eyes, large and bright, and saw not fear, but a fierce stubbornness, a compassion that made her risk her own life for a defenseless animal. And in that moment, looking at that woman, drenched, smeared with mud, but with an unwavering courage, Augustus of Valmont felt something he thought had died with his wife. Respect. A deep and overwhelming respect. He helped her out of the water and onto his horse. Then he mounted behind her, wrapping an arm around her to prevent her from falling. The ride back to the manor house was made in silence, but it was a different kind of silence. It was no longer an abyss between them, but a space filled with a new understanding, a newfound admiration. He felt her trembling in his arms, not just from cold, but from exhaustion, and felt a protective impulse that startled him. Upon their arrival, Lucy and Teresa wrapped her in blankets and led her inside, scolding her and caring for her at the same time. Augustus remained on the veranda, watching the rain that began to subside, the scent of wet earth in the air. He looked at his own hands, which still felt the warmth of her body through the wet fabric. That woman, sent to him as a punishment, as a burden, had just taught him a lesson about courage and the value of life. And he realized, with a startling clarity, that she was far from invisible. She was becoming the most real and alive thing within that house of shadows. After the storm episode, the household dynamic shifted, subtly, yet definitively. The respect Augustus now felt for Amelia manifested in small gestures. He began to wait for her for dinner and the table. Once a vast and solitary territory seemed to shrink. Conversations grew longer, more personal. He asked about the books she read, and she, with a newfound courage, asked about the estate, about the harvests, about life in the countryside. She discovered he was a just man with his staff, passionate about his lands, and knowledgeable about every inch of that ground. Behind the facade of the cold, reclusive baron, there was an intelligent man, and she was beginning to suspect a deeply lonely one. Amelia, in turn, felt herself blossom in that routine. The freedom to walk through the fields, the work that gave purpose to her days, and, especially, the feeling of being seen as a person, not a problem, were transforming her. The sadness was still there, a shadow in the depths of her eyes, but now there was also a glimmer of life, a serenity she hadn't known before. The house, however, still held its ghosts. The largest of them centered on the music room, a chamber that remained always closed. Once Amelia asked Teresa why no one ever entered it. The girl lowered her voice, as if speaking of a forbidden secret. It was the late Baroness Lady Eleanor's favorite place. She played the harpsichord like an angel. After she passed, the master ordered the room locked. No one has entered since. They say the music died in this house with her. Amelia's curiosity was piqued. She, who loved music and had been deprived of playing since her family fell into disgrace, felt a melancholic attraction to that forbidden room. The third turning point, the moment that would bring music back to echo through the silent corridors, happened on a full moon night. The air was still and warm, and a sweet scent of jasmine drifted from the garden. After dinner, Augustus seemed more introspective than usual. He walked through the drawing room, restless, stopping in front of portraits, objects, as if searching for something he couldn't find. Amelia watched him from the sofa, where she was reading a book. The candelabra's light cast long shadows on the wall, and the only sound was the ticking of a grandfather clock in the corridor. Suddenly, he stopped and turned to her. There was a strange expression on his face, a mixture of pain and hesitation. "Do you play any instrument, Miss Amelia?" The question caught her by surprise. She felt a knot in her throat. I used to. The harpsichord. But it's been a very long time." He stared at her for a long moment, his blue eyes scrutinizing her face. "Would you play for me?" Amelia's heart raced. He was speaking of the music room, of Eleanor's harpsichord. "Sir, I don't know if I should. I heard that room." "I know what they say," he interrupted, his voice hoarse. "But tonight the silence is deafening me." He walked to a small chest of drawers, took a bronze key, and held out his hand to her. "Please." It was more than a request. It was a plea. Amelia stood up, the book forgotten on the sofa, and took the key. Her hands trembled. He guided her down the corridor to the double dark wooden doors. When he inserted the key and turned it, the sound of the lock disengaging seemed to echo throughout the house, as if a spell was being broken. As they opened the doors, a scent of dust and still time enveloped them. Moonlight streamed through a crack in the curtain, revealing the outlines of furniture covered by white sheets, like sleeping ghosts. In the center of the room, imposing, stood the harpsichord, also covered. Augustus walked to the instrument and, with a slow, solemn gesture, pulled back the sheet. The dark, polished wood gleamed under the moonlight. He ran his fingers over the closed lid, a gesture of both tenderness and pain. "She spent hours here," he said, his voice low, almost a whisper. The house was full of music, full of life. Amelia felt the weight of that moment. She felt the presence of the other woman there, in the dust, in the silence, in the pain of that man. She approached the harpsichord and sat on the bench. She opened the lid, and her fingers hovered over the keys, yellowed by time. It was out of tune, dusty, but it was still an instrument capable of creating beauty. Augustus stepped back and sat in an armchair in a dark corner of the room, becoming a silhouette. "Play something. Anything." Amelia closed her eyes, took a deep breath, and began to play. At first her fingers were stiff, uncertain. The notes came out hesitantly, stumbling over each other. But little by little, her muscle memory returned. The music began to flow. A melancholic and gentle melody she knew by heart. The melody filled the room, then the corridor, spreading through the house like water, cleansing the dust, dissolving the sadness. She played with her soul. Each note was a tear she hadn't shed, a word she hadn't spoken, a dream she had abandoned. The music was her story, her pain, but also her resilience. In the corner of the room, Augustus closed his eyes. The music transported him to the past, to the happy days with Eleanor. But it wasn't just her memory he felt, it was something new. Amelia's melody was different. It had a depth, a sadness he recognized, because it was the same he carried. But there was also a spark of hope, a stubbornness to continue, to find beauty even in darkness. He wasn't just listening to music, he was listening to her soul. When the last note faded into the air, a profound silence settled. But it was a different silence. It was no longer empty. It was filled with the emotion the music had left behind. Amelia remained with her hands on the keyboard, eyes closed, her breath catching. She felt exposed, vulnerable, as if she had revealed her most intimate secret. She heard Augustus stand. He approached and stopped behind her. She did not turn. She felt his hand rest gently on her shoulder. The touch was light, but laden with meaning. "Thank you," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "It's been 7 years since I felt the desire to live." A solitary tear streamed down Amelia's face and fell onto the harpsichord keys. In that room of ghosts, under the moonlight, the music had not just broken the house's silence, it had broken the silence of 2 lonely hearts. And for the first time, they were no longer alone in their pain. They were together in it. The music became a ritual. Almost every night, after dinner, Augustus would ask Amelia to play. The music room, once a sanctuary of pain, transformed into a refuge for both. As she played, he would sit in the armchair and listen in silence, his eyes closed. These were moments of deep intimacy, built not with words, but with harmonies and melodies that spoke everything they couldn't express. The entire house seemed to breathe a sigh of relief. Mrs. Locy hummed in the kitchen. Teresa smiled more, and even old Sebastian seemed to have less bowed shoulders. Amelia had brought life back to Vermont. She herself felt lighter. Slowly, the estate became her home. She knew every staff member by name, cared for the garden with a tenderness that made the roses bloom more vibrantly, and her afternoons in the sewing room were now filled with making small clothes for the workers' children. She found a purpose, a place, and to her surprise, she also found a peace she never imagined possible. But the world beyond the estate gates had not forgotten her. The 4th turning point arrived in the form of a sealed envelope brought by a messenger. It bore her family's crest. Amelia's heart froze. Augustus was in his study when Sebastian delivered the letter. He saw her blanch, and his protective instinct, now stronger than ever, surged forth. "Bad news?" he asked, his voice grave. Amelia opened the letter with trembling hands. It was from her father. The words were a mixture of command and false tenderness. He said he regretted the way he had treated her, that he missed her, and that he had arranged a new match, an even more advantageous marriage. He demanded her immediate return. He didn't ask, he ordered. To him, she was still a piece in his game of appearances and business. A mixture of anger and despair seized Amelia. To return to that life of lies, to be sold again like cattle. The idea suffocated her. She looked around, at the drawing-room of Valmont Estate, at the sunlight streaming through the window, at the distant sound of the harpsichord that still echoed in her memory. This place, which had been her prison, had become her sanctuary. "My father," she said to Augustus, her voice thick with emotion, "he wants me back, to marry another." Augustus felt a pang of something he couldn't identify. Anger, jealousy, fear of losing her. He approached her, his face serious. "And what will you do?" Emilia looked up at him. They were the eyes of one about to make the most important decision of her life. "I won't," she said, with a firmness that surprised herself. "My place is here now." Those words hung in the air between them. Asterisk, my place is here, asterisk. She wasn't just refusing her father. She was choosing Valmont. She was choosing the life she had built there. She was, in a way, choosing him. An immense relief flooded Augustus's chest, followed by a wave of tenderness. "Then, this is your home," he replied, his voice softer than she had ever heard it. "No one will take you from here against your will." That afternoon, Emilia wrote her reply to her father. It was the hardest and most liberating letter of her life. With firm handwriting, she refused the order, stating that she had found her place and would not return. As she sealed the envelope, she felt as if she was sealing the door to her past. But the newfound peace was short-lived, the calm before the storm. And the storm had a name: Beatrice of Valmont, Augustus's sister-in-law. The fifth turning point arrived in a carriage far more luxurious than the one that had brought Emilia. Beatrice was the younger sister of the late Eleanor, a woman of stunning beauty, but cold as marble, blonde with green eyes and a smile that never reached her gaze. Since her sister's death, she considered herself the guardian of Valmont's legacy. She visited the estate a few times a year to inspect things and, primarily, to exert her power over her brother-in-law, whom she treated with a mixture of false concern and authority. She arrived unannounced, as she always did. She descended from the carriage with the elegance of a queen and entered the house as if it were her own. Her gaze swept the room and quickly noticed the changes, the fresh flowers in the vases, the lighter air, the faint sound of laughter coming from the kitchen. And then her gaze fell upon Emilia, who was coming from the garden with a basket of vegetables. "And who is this?" Beatrice asked Sebastian, her voice laden with disdain, completely ignoring Emilia's presence. Before the butler could answer, Augustus appeared at the top of the stairs. "Beatrice, what an unpleasant surprise." "Augustus, darling," she said, her tone instantly changing to an affected sweetness. "I came to see how you were. And I see you've acquired a new maid." Emilia felt her face burn. The humiliation struck her like a slap. "Emilia is not a maid," Augustus said, descending the stairs, his voice firm and sharp. "She is a guest of the house." Beatrice raised a perfectly arched eyebrow. Her green eyes flashed as she scrutinized Emilia from head to toe, noticing her simple dress but dignified posture. She saw there, instantly, a threat to her control, to her influence over Augustus, to the untouchable memory of her sister. The following days were a silent hell. Beatrice settled into the house and began a campaign of psychological harassment against Emilia. She praised the beauty and virtues of the late Eleanor in front of Emilia, comparing them cruelly. She gave orders to Emilia as if she were a servant, only to apologize with a false smile. "Oh dear, forgive me, with your simple clothes. I get confused." Emilia endured everything with stoic calm, but inside she felt her peace draining away. Augustus noticed the tension and tried to intervene, but Beatrice was a master of dissimulation, making him seem like a rude host. Beatrice's cruelty reached its peak when she announced she would host a ball at the estate. "To liven up this place, Augustus, it's like a mausoleum. Let's invite the neighbors, relive old times." Augustus detested parties, but she cornered him in such a way that he couldn't refuse. And then came the final blow. On the eve of the ball, Beatrice entered Amelia's room with a box in her hands. "Darling, I know you have nothing appropriate to wear," she said, with her false generosity, "so I took the liberty of selecting a dress for you. I'm sure Eleanor wouldn't mind." She opened the box. Inside was one of the late Baroness's most beautiful dresses, a sky-blue silk gown, famous throughout the region. It was a cruel trap. Beatrice wanted Amelia to appear at the ball, dressed as Eleanor's ghost. Everyone would compare, whisper, humiliate her. It would be the final proof that she was just a cheap imitation, a usurper. Amelia looked at the dress, and then at Beatrice's smiling face. She understood the game, and for a moment she thought of hiding, of not appearing at the ball. But then a flame of rebellion ignited within her. She would not give Beatrice the pleasure of victory. She would wear the dress, but she would wear it her way. The night of the ball arrived charged with an almost palpable electricity. Carriages began to arrive at dusk, bringing the most important families of the region. The manor house, usually silent, now pulsed with the sound of conversations, laughter, and the tuning of the small orchestra hired by Beatrice. The candelabra lights reflected on the polished floorboards and the guests' jewels, creating an atmosphere of festivity that contrasted brutally with the drama unfolding backstage. Upstairs, Amelia looked at herself in the mirror. Eleanor's dress fit her like a glove, the blue silk enhancing the color of her eyes and the pallor of her skin. It was, without a doubt, the most beautiful dress she had ever worn, but in wearing it, she felt as if she were wearing a costume, the skin of another woman. Beatrice's intention was clear: to transform her into a shadow, a pale imitation of the true Baroness. Everyone in the ballroom would look at her and see not Amelia, but the absence of Eleanor. For a moment, courage abandoned her. Tears welled in her eyes. She thought of taking off the dress, of locking herself in the room and waiting for that night of humiliation to end. But then she remembered the storm, the lamb she had saved, the first note she had drawn from the dusty harpsichord. She remembered the woman who had refused to return to her father, the woman who had chosen that place as her home. She was not a shadow. She was Amelia. With steady hands, she finished getting ready. She did not try to imitate Eleanor's hairstyle, whose portraits were throughout the house. Instead, she fashioned a simple, elegant bun, leaving a few strands loose to frame her face. She wore no jewelry, except for a small silver brooch that had belonged to her mother. Her adornment was her own dignity. When she looked in the mirror one last time, she saw no one's ghost. She saw herself, ready for battle. In the ballroom, Beatrice floated among the guests, radiant in her emerald green gown, receiving compliments for the party. She sought Augustus with her eyes, eager to see his reaction to her little theatrical play. Augustus, in turn, felt like a stranger in his own house. He greeted people with cold courtesy, his thoughts fixed on Amelia. He knew what Beatrice was planning and felt an impotent rage. He himself felt trapped in her snare. "Where is your protégé, Augustus?" Beatrice asked, approaching him with a venomous smile. "I hope my gift pleased her." At that exact moment, the murmur at the top of the staircase ceased. All heads turned. Amelia had appeared. A shocked silence fell over the ballroom. Whispers began immediately. "It's Eleanor's dress! How audacious! Did the Baron allow this?" Everyone expected to see a cowering, humiliated young woman, But that was not what they saw. Amelia descended the stairs slowly, one step at a time. Her chin held high, her back straight, her gaze firm, passing over the heads of the guests, searching for a single face. She did not look like an imitation. The simplicity of her hairstyle and the absence of jewelry meant that the dress did not wear her. It was she who wore the dress. She had transformed it. It was no longer the late Baroness's dress. It was Amelia's dress. Beatrice's smile froze on her face. The plan had backfired. Instead of humiliating her, she had placed her at the center of attention, and Amelia was shining. Augustus watched her from the foot of the stairs, his heart pounding. He did not see the ghost of his wife. He saw the courageous woman who had faced a storm, the sensitive woman who had awakened music in his house, the strong woman who now faced an audience of vultures with genuine grace. In that moment, he realized that what he felt for her went far beyond respect or admiration. It was something deeper, more dangerous, more alive. When she reached the last step, he extended his hand to her. A public, defiant gesture. "You are beautiful, Amelia," he said, his voice loud enough for those nearby to hear. She accepted his hand, and a warmth ran through her arm. "Thank you, sir." The orchestra began to play a waltz. Couples moved to the center of the ballroom. Beatrice approached Augustus, ready to claim the first dance, as she always did. But he did not look at her. His eyes were fixed on Amelia. "Will you grant me this dance?" he asked. Amelia nodded, her heart leaping. He led her to the center of the ballroom, under everyone's incredulous gaze. Beatrice stood still, her face a mask of fury and humiliation. As he took her in his arms, the world around them disappeared. There was only the music and the touch of their hands. They danced in silence, communicating through their eyes. He led her with gentle firmness, and she followed with absolute trust. To others, it was a scandal, the Baron dancing with his mysterious guest, who wore the clothes of the deceives. But for the two of them, it was a declaration, an act of rebellion against the shadows of the past and the intrigues of the present. As they whirled across the floor, Augustus leaned in and whispered in her ear, "I never thought I would see anyone wear this dress again. But on you, it seems to have found a new life." Amelia looked at him, her eyes shining. "Perhaps it's not just the dress," she whispered back. They continued to dance, oblivious to the stares, the judgments. They were just a man and a woman, finding in each other a safe harbor in the midst of a social storm. That ball, planned to be the end of Amelia's dignity, became the beginning of something entirely new. The sixth turning point was not her humiliation, but the silent triumph of her strength and the public awakening of the Baron of Valmont's feelings. And, in the corner of the ballroom, Beatrice watched, bitter defeat on her face, planning her next move. She had lost a battle, but she was determined not to lose the war. The morning after, the ball dawned with a tense quietness. The sun streamed from the windows, illuminating the mess from the previous night's party, but the atmosphere in the house was heavy. Like the calm after a battle, Beatrice took her breakfast in silence, casting sharp glances in Amelia's direction, and left soon after, with a cold farewell and a veiled promise of return. Her departure was a relief, but the shadow of her presence and intentions remained. The event of the previous night had changed everything. Augustus's gesture, dancing with Amelia and publicly defending her, was a line drawn in the sand. There was no longer any denying the connection that existed between them, and this new reality frightened them as much as it attracted them. That afternoon, Augustus found Amelia in the garden near the rose bushes. She tended to the flowers with absorbed concentration, as if trying to find order in the earth to compensate for the chaos in her heart. He approached in silence, observing her for a moment. The sunlight filtered through the leaves, creating patterns in her hair. She seemed to belong to that place, as if she had always been there. "Amelia," he called, his voice soft. She turned, a small startle. "Sir, we need to talk," he said, his face serious. He guided her to a stone bench under the shade of an ancient oak. They sat, a respectful distance between them, but the energy that emanated from both filled the entire space. Augustus looked at his own hands, as if searching for the right words. "What happened last night?" he began, his voice hoarse. "I need you to understand." He paused, and when he raised his eyes to her, Amelia saw an agony that made her hold her breath. "I loved my wife," he said, the words coming out with difficulty. "Eleanor was the light of this house. When she left, the light went out, and I faded with her. I swore to myself that I would never love again, that I would never allow anyone to take her place in my heart. It would be a betrayal of her memory." He looked at the horizon, at the golden fields that stretched as far as the eye could see. "For the past 7 years, I have lived like a ghost in my own house, guarding her memories, protecting her legacy. Every object, every room, every silence was a homage to her." He turned to Amelia, his blue eyes filled with a searing pain. "And then you arrived, and I hated you for it. Hated your presence, which disturbed my morning. Hated your strength, which reminded me of my weakness. And, above all, I began to hate the way you, little by little, began to light the lamps again." Amelia listened in silence, her heart aching with compassion. "When I saw you last night, in that dress," he continued, his voice faltering, "for an instant I felt a terrible panic. I felt I was betraying Eleanor, seeing another woman in her place, more alive, more real than my memories. And I felt fear of what I am feeling for you." The confession hung in the air, devastating and liberating. He did not say, "I love you," but he said something much deeper. He confessed his conflict, his guilt, his fear of living again. Amelia reached out and, hesitating for a second, touched his arm. It was a simple gesture, but of immense intimacy. "Augustus," she said, using his first name for the first time. The words sounded natural, right? "Look at me." He did, and she gave him a sad, wise smile. No one betrays the past when they decide to live again. Memories are not chains to bind us to pain. They are roots that give us the strength to grow. The love you felt for her does not diminish with a new love. It transforms, expands. It made you the man you are today. Her words were like a balm on his open wound. She was not competing with Eleanor's memory. She was honoring it. She was giving him permission to move forward. "You are not extinguishing her light," she continued, her voice firm and gentle. "You are simply allowing a new candle to be lit beside it. The house is large enough for more than one light." In that moment, Augustus of Valmont's armor finally shattered. The facade of the indifferent baron, the man who hid behind pain, crumbled. A tear, the first in 7 years, streamed down his face. Then another. He did not try to hide them. He buried his face in his hands and wept. A silent, suffering cry of a man who finally allowed himself to feel, who finally allowed himself to mourn not only the loss of his wife, but the loss of himself. Amelia said nothing more. She merely stayed by his side, her hand still on his arm, offering her silent presence as a safe harbor. She did not try to console him with empty words. She let him weep. Let him release the pain that had imprisoned him for so long. The sun began to set, painting the sky with colors of fire and honey. And there, in the estate garden, amidst the roses she herself had tended, a man and a woman shared a moment of vulnerability and healing. He wept for the past that haunted him, and she sheltered him with the strength of one who had learned to survive her own hell. The seventh turning point was not a grand revelation or a dramatic event. It was a moment of silence, of tears, and of a simple truth spoken by a woman who understood pain and new beginnings. And in that instant, love, which until then was a frightening and forbidden feeling, began to look very much like hope. The confession in the garden opened a door between them that could no longer be closed. In the days that followed, a new tenderness blossomed. They rode together in the mornings, talked late into the night in the library, and at times, their hands met in a brief, electric touch. Love was there, growing in the silence, in their glances, in their knowing smiles. But like the most delicate flowers, it was also fragile, vulnerable to the storms of the outside world. Rumors about the ball spread through the region like wildfire. The story of the Baron of Volmont and his mysterious protégé became the main topic in drawing rooms. Some spoke with malice, others with romantic curiosity. But all agreed on one thing. It was a scandal. Augustus's reputation, once impeccable, was now stained by the presence of Emilia, a woman without name or dowry, living under his roof. Emilia felt the weight of the stairs when she went to the small village near the estate. Whispers followed her, and people who had once greeted her with courtesy now looked at her with judgment. She tried to ignore it, but the words hurt. They called her an adventuress, an usurper. The happiness she had begun to feel was being poisoned by others' malice. She also saw the worry on Augustus's face. He was a man of honor, and although he appeared indifferent to the rumors, she knew it affected him. He was defying social conventions for her, and Emilia began to wonder if their love, which for her was a gift, would not be for him a source of ruin. The seed of doubt, planted by society and watered by her own insecurity, began to sprout in her heart. The eighth turning point was a painful decision born of this fear. One night, as she watched Augustus in his study, poring over the estate's account books, his face tired under the lamplight, she made a resolution. She loved him too much to be the cause of his dishonor. She could not allow him to sacrifice his name and position for her. If her love was true, she needed to protect him, even if it meant protecting him from herself. The next morning, she packed her few belongings into a small suitcase. She wrote a short note, her hands trembling and her heart in pieces. "My dear Augustus, forgive me. The love I feel for you is too great to allow me to be your ruin. I return to you the peace that my presence stole. I will be eternally grateful for your kindness. Farewell, Emilia." She left the note on the bed and tiptoed downstairs before the sun rose. The house was silent. Every creak of the floorboards seemed like a cry of farewell. When she passed the music room door, she felt an immense urge to cry. She was leaving behind not only a man she loved, but the only place she had ever felt was home. She walked down the dirt road, the suitcase heavy in her hand, not knowing where to go. Perhaps to the big city, where she could find work as a seamstress or a governess, where she could disappear and become anonymous again. Each step away from the estate was a stab in her chest. In the manor house, Teresa found the empty room and the note. She ran, desperate, to inform the Baron. Augustus read Emilia's words, and a chilling cold took over his body, more frightening than any storm. Ruin? Peace? He crushed the paper in his hand, fury and despair taking hold of him. He did not want the peace of silence and solitude. He wanted her. At that moment, it began to rain. A fine, persistent rain. Without thinking, he ran to the stables, mounted his horse, and galloped down the road, his heart pounding against his ribs. He spotted her in the distance, a solitary figure walking in the rain, hunched. He caught up with her near the main gate of the estate, the landmark that separated his lands from the rest of the world. He leaped from his horse and ran to her, stopping in front of her, blocking her path. Both were drenched, breathless. "Where do you think you're going?" he asked, his voice hoarse with emotion, holding her by the shoulder. "I can't stay. I can't destroy you," she said, tears mixing with the rain on her face. "Destroy me." He laughed, a joyless laugh. "Amelia, don't you understand? You didn't destroy me. You saved me. I was dead, and you brought me back to life. And now you want to leave. People, what they are saying," she whispered, her voice broken. "To hell with what people say," he exploded, the control he had always maintained finally breaking. "My entire life I lived according to what was expected of me. The Baron of Valmont, the honorable man, the faithful widower. I lived in a prison of appearances and mourning. You freed me from that, and I won't go back." He held her face between his hands, forcing her to look him in the eyes. "What I feel for you is not a prize you win for being good, nor a punishment I receive for forgetting the past. It is love, Amelia. Simply love. And love doesn't care about scandals or what others think. It only cares about being together." And then, in the rain that washed over them, he kissed her. It was not a tender or hesitant kiss. It was a desperate, hungry kiss, full of all the pain, all the longing, and all the love they had suppressed. It was a kiss that sealed a promise. A kiss that said there would be no more escape, no more fear. Amelia responded to the kiss with the same intensity, her body relaxing in his arms, the suitcase falling forgotten in the mud. There, at the estate gate, under the grey sky, they finally surrendered to what they felt. The 9th turning point was not her departure, but his return. He didn't go after her to bring her back into his life. He went after her to tell her that she, was his life. And together, drenched and trembling, they turned back and walked home, ready to face the world as long as they were side by side. The return to the manor house was a new beginning. The kiss in the rain washed away the last doubts and fears. They no longer needed to hide in silences and glances. Their love was now a declared, palpable truth, filling every room of the house with a new energy. Augustus and Amelia were no longer the Baron and his guest. They were a man and a woman who loved each other, and that simplicity was their greatest strength. News of the reconciliation, and how it happened, reached the village and, surprisingly, began to turn the tide of public opinion. The story of the Baron galloping in the rain after the woman he loved had a romantic appeal that even the most cynical couldn't ignore. Gradually, malicious whispers were replaced by admiring sighs. They became a local legend. But one last ghost from Amelia's past still needed to be confronted. A few weeks later, a letter arrived. This time, it was not from her father, but from a lawyer in the capital city. The handwriting was formal, and the content shocking. Amelia's father had passed away. A sudden attack had taken him, leaving behind a trail of debts even larger than she imagined. The family's old house would be sold, and all that remained of the name and fortune was dust. Along with the lawyer's notification, there was a personal envelope addressed to her. It was her father's handwriting. With a heavy heart, and with Augustus by her side, holding her hand, she opened it. The letter was short, written with a trembling hand, probably in his last days. There were no orders, no demands. There was only a plea for forgiveness. "My daughter," he had written, "pride blinded me my entire life. I traded my family's love for the admiration of strangers, and in the end, I have neither. Your refusal to return was the hardest and most necessary lesson I ever received. You chose dignity over appearances, and for that, I admire you. I hope the man to whom I delivered you as a punishment has the wisdom to recognize you as the blessing you are. Forgive this old fool if you can. Farewell, Amelia cried as she read the words. They were not tears of sadness for the loss of a father she barely knew, but of relief for a cycle of pain finally closing. That plea for forgiveness, coming too late for a reconciliation in life, was the final liberation from her past. She was no longer the dishonored daughter, a pawn in a game of pride. She was a free woman, with a future she would choose for herself. Augustus embraced her, letting her cry on his shoulder. He understood that those tears were necessary to heal the last wounds. Her father's death was not a tragedy, but the final point in a chapter of humiliation and pain. In the days that followed, Amelia found a new serenity. The mourning she felt was for what could have been, not for what was. She clung even more to the life she had built at Vermont, valuing every moment of peace, every gesture of affection. The 10th and final turning point was not an event, but a perception, a silent epiphany in Augustus's heart. One sunny morning, he woke early and went to his room's veranda, which overlooked the garden, and he saw her. Amelia was down there barefoot, in a simple cotton dress, tending to the flowers. The morning sun illuminated her hair, and she hummed a soft melody, the same one she had played on the harpsichord that first night. She moved with a natural grace, conversing with the plants, laughing when a hummingbird approached a rose. The staff passed by and greeted her with genuine affection. Mrs. Losey brought her a cup of coffee, and the two chatted like old friends. In that moment, Augustus saw the scene with a blinding clarity. That woman, who had arrived there as a burden, as a punishment imposed by fate, had become the pulsating heart of the estate. She had filled the silence with music, the darkness with light, the routine with life. She hadn't taken Eleanor's place. She had created her own place, a place no one else could fill. She was not the new Baroness, she was Amelia. And Vermont Estate, which for 7 years had been a mausoleum of memories, had become a home again. Because of her. He realized that his love for her was not just a passion that had saved him from loneliness. It was a deep admiration for the woman she was, strong, gentle, resilient. The woman who saw value in small things, who had the courage to save lambs and face prejudice, who had the wisdom to forgive and the strength to begin anew. He descended the stairs, his heart overflowing with a calm and certain love. He walked to the garden and stopped behind her. She turned, sensing his presence, and smiled. A luminous smile which seemed to contain all the sun of that morning. "Good morning," she said. He did not reply with words. He simply took her in his arms and kissed her. A kiss different from the others. It was not desperate, nor hungry. It was a kiss of gratitude, of certainty, of peace. A kiss of one who had finally come home. "Marry me, Amelia," he whispered against her lips. Her eyes filled with tears, but this time they were tears of pure happiness. "Yes," she replied, her voice choked. "Yes, Augustus. 1,000 times yes," and amidst the flowers she herself had planted. Under the complicit gaze of the morning sun, the Baron and the young woman who had been sent as a punishment sealed their destiny. Not an imposed destiny, but a chosen one, built day after day, with respect, courage, and, finally, with a love stronger than any past and brighter than any future they could imagine. The news of the engagement spread through the estate, not as a rumor, but as a celebration. The staff, who had witnessed Amelia's entire journey, from her timid and frightened arrival to becoming the soul of the house, celebrated with genuine joy. For them it was not a marriage of convenience or scandal, but the union of two people who healed and found each other. Beaumont Estate was in celebration. They decided the ceremony would be simple, held right there on the estate, the place that was the true testament to their story. The stage for the climax, for the final declaration, would not be a church altar, but the pulsating heart of life at Beaumont, harvest time. The chosen night was that of the Harvest Festival, an ancient tradition that Augustus had abandoned after Eleanor's death, but which Amelia had insisted on reviving. It was a night to give thanks for the bounty of the land, to celebrate everyone's work. Large bonfires were lit in the main courtyard. Long tables were set with abundant food prepared by Mrs. Lucy and other women from the estate. And a group of local musicians played lively folk tunes. Amelia did not wear a traditional wedding gown. She chose a simple white linen dress, embroidered by herself with small wildflowers. Her hair was loose, adorned with a crown of wildflowers that Teresa had helped her make. She was radiant with a serene beauty that came from within, from the happiness of one who had finally found her place in the world. Augustus awaited her near the main bonfire. He, too, wore simple clothes, befitting a country gentleman, not a baron. When he saw her approach, walking among his staff, who parted ways and applauded her, his heart overflowed. She was not a noble woman arriving to take possession, but part of that land, of those people. He took her hand and turned to everyone. The music stopped, conversations ceased. An expectant silence fell over the courtyard, broken only by the crackle of the bonfire. In the light of the torches, Augustus's face was serious, but his eyes shone. "My friends," he began, his voice firm and clear, echoing in the night. "You all know the history of this house. You know the silence and shadow that lived here for many years. And you all have seen the change this woman brought into our lives." He turned and looked at Amelia, a gaze full of love and admiration. Amelia arrived at Beaumont by imposition of fate as a guest. Many saw her as a burden, a mystery. But today, before all of you, who are our family, I want to declare the truth. Amelia is no longer a guest, nor a burden. He paused, holding her hand more tightly. She is the Lady of Beaumont, not by title or role, but because she won this place with her courage, her kindness, and her love. She is the heart of this estate. The silence that followed was more eloquent than any applause. It was a silence of respect, of recognition, of emotion. Sebastian, the old butler, had tears in his eyes. Mrs. Lucy smiled with her whole face. And then one of the oldest workers shouted, "Long live Lady Amelia! Long live the Baron!" And the courtyard erupted in cheers and applause. Augustus smiled, a wide and true smile that transformed his face. He took Amelia's hand, the same hands that once trembled with fear, that sewed invisible mends, that saved lambs, and that drew music from silence, and led her to the veranda of the manor house. From there, they looked down at the celebration and out at the fields stretching under the light of the full moon. The scent of hay, earth, and the new wine served at the feast filled the air. Their love had not erased the past with its pains and losses, but had redeemed it. It had given new meaning to everything. Augustus learned that hope could, indeed, be reborn from the ashes, stronger and wiser. And Amelia discovered that true freedom was not fleeing a destiny, but having the courage to build a new one, and that surrender, when made for love, was not a punishment, but the beginning of fulfillment. The distant sound of the harpsichord began to drift from the music room. One of the musicians had asked permission to play. The soft melody mingled with the sound of the celebration, with the wind blowing through the oak trees. Augustus wrapped Amelia in his arms, and they stood there, looking at the future that stretched before them, vast and golden like the fields of Vermont at harvest time. They understood that destiny, however cruel and winding it may seem, is sometimes just preparing the ground, turning over the soil of the soul, so that seeds of courage, tenderness, and love can finally blossom. So, did you enjoy following Amelia and Augustus's journey? Stories like this remind us that, even in the most difficult moments, there is always room for hope and a new beginning. If you were moved, if you rooted for them and were inspired by them, don't keep that emotion all to yourself. Leave a comment below telling us what you liked most, which twist caught you by surprise. And of course, don't forget to leave a generous like to help us bring you more heartwarming stories. Oh, and if you're not yet part of our family, subscribe to the channel and hit the bell. That way, you won't miss any chapters of the upcoming emotions. We'll see you in the next story.